And welcome to my presentation, which is on the question, what do you understand by Skopos theory and how would you evaluate its strengths and weaknesses? Now I'm going to divide my presentation into the following sections. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history and definition of the theory. I'm going to talk about the rules of the Skopos theory. I'm then going to try and apply the theory in practice, so to a case study. I'm going to talk about the advantages and criticisms, and then I'm going to finish with the conclusion and a bibliography. In order to look at the history of the Skopos theory, we need to look at a definition of the word skopos. Skopos comes from the Greek meaning aim or purpose. It was first developed by Hans Vermeer in the 1970s, and it was then published in the book Grundlegung einer allgemeinen Transaktionstheorie in 1984, which was co-authored with Katharina Reiss. Now, for the benefit of the non-German speakers amongst you, I will be referring to this book via the English references in Monday's book. The theory focuses above all on the purpose of the translation, i.e. the end product. Hence, the word skopos, aim or purpose. We are really looking at the aim or the purpose of the target text. So, Scheffner considers the theory to represent a general shift from predominantly linguistic and rather formal translation theories to a more functionally and socio-culturally oriented concept of translation, and this is backed up by Flynn, who confirms this opinion, stating it is a prime example of such a functional approach in that it anchors translations in a socio-cultural context and views translated texts from within such contexts. So we're really talking about a translation that is in the context of the reader, of the target audience. So we're going to look at a little bit at the rules of the Skopos theory. These were defined in a hierarchy of 6 rules in the book I mentioned previously, Grundlegung einer allgemeinen Transaktionstheorie. Now, I'm going to show you the 6 rules. Now, we're going to look at these rules in a minute or two. The one word you might have struck you as a little bit strange or a little bit unknown is translatum, which quite simply means target text. And we're going to look at that later. To decide on the skopos of a text, we need to first define its function, and to define its function we could use Freihoff's adaptation of Reiss's text type triangle, which you can see here. Now, Freihoff's adaptation adds examples to Reiss's text type triangle. So we have examples of purely informative, purely operative, or purely expressive texts, and also examples of texts which combine 2 or 3 functions. Now, I'm going to use the example of a translation of a leaflet from a German electronics company that you receive with a new ink cartridge or toner that explains how to recycle the product once it's finished. Now, if we look at the triangle and we consider the translation to hand, we might be tempted to say it's most close to some operating instructions. How do I recycle this cartridge? I do this or I do that. However, there is also the environmental aspect of the translation, why it is good, why it is necessary to dispose of the product correctly, so there is an operative function to the text as well. So looking at the triangle, if we had to choose, we will be slightly more towards a tourist approach. Looking at Rule 1, a translatum is determined by its skopos. The skopos is defined in the commission that one receives from the client, in this case from the electronics company or its agent. Here we know that we are looking at something between operating instructions or a tourist brochure according to Freihoff's triangle or adapted triangle, as it is both informative and provides information and operative. It persuades the user to recycle. There isn't really any expressive nature to this translation. The text isn't entertaining, nor is it intended to be. It's not to say that it couldn't be, but in this case, it's not. 2. A target text is an offer of information in a target culture and target language concerning an offer of information in a source culture and source language. This means that both the source and target texts function in their respective linguistic and cultural contexts. The target culture, i.e. the UK residents, need to receive and understand the information the source text presents, and a translator is essential in order to provide the translator. Without the translator, it's not possible to provide a correct target text. Rule 3. A target text does not initiate an offer of information in a clearly reversible way. This means that the target text must be relevant to the target audience, and therefore certain elements can be amended. The amendments to the text will not necessarily be relevant to the original audience. If, taking the example of the pamphlet, the translator might decide that additional information about the environment or about recycling are necessary because habits or traditions of recycling are different in both countries, the translator is free to add these as necessary. If the text is translated directly back into the source language, it will therefore not match the source text completely. 4 and 5 concern coherence internally and with the source text. Reis and Vermeer state that coherence rule must be interpretable as coherent with the target text receiver's situation. There's an element of fidelity, the fidelity rule, which requires coherence between the translatum and the source text. It must be coherent. And the target reader must be able to understand the translatum. The information present in the translatum must also match that of the source text. It can't deviate that much that the information differs. And additional information not present in the source text may need to be included to make the translatum more relevant. So extra information is possible, however less information is not possible. 6 is relatively straightforward. The 5 rules above stand in hierarchical order, with the Skopos rule predominating. Vermeer states that the translatum is primarily determined by its Skopos or commission. So the Skopos or commission is the most important part of the translation in the Skopos theory. The advantages of the Skopos theory are that the end result is of primary concern. The whole time we are looking at the target text and we're looking at a product which can be understood by the target audience in their context. The source text can be translated in different ways according to its purpose. This means the translator is free to adapt the text so that it conforms to its skopos, and additional information can be added when and where appropriate. Equally, information which is of no use to the target reader can be left out. So the translator is free to adapt as and when necessary. There are various criticisms of the Skopos theory. One question is, do all texts have a name? If they don't, does the Skopos theory even exist? There's the question of potential dethroning of the source text, or the fact that stylistic or semantic elements may lack in the target text. And there's also the question of unnecessary jargon in the theory itself. Flynn and Nord are quite critical of Vermeer, asking if all texts have a name. Vermeer posits a plausible hierarchy of relations between the aspects presented by Skopos theory, but offers no tangible evidence that they exist. Vermeer even admits that not all texts have a name. Not all actions have an aim, some have no aim. This is claimed to be the case with literary texts. Such texts are claimed to be aimless. And Schäffner summarizes Schreitmüller, saying that Reis and Vermeer were determined to establish a general and uniform translation theory under the concept of offer information. Monday says that the Skopos theory is a general theory that cannot or does not apply to literary texts, as they have no specific purpose and are far too complex stylistically. Vermeer simply doesn't agree and says if no aim can be attributed to an action, it can no longer be treated as an action. Flynn brings up the matter of potential dethroning of the source text. He argues that the source text is no longer the foremost criterion for a translator's decisions. It is just one of the many sources of information used by translators. So translators in theory are going to use other texts, other sources to create their target texts. However, this is questionable as the Scopus theory does require fidelity as long as this is to the benefit of the Scopus. So the translator should remain true to the source text as long as this is to the benefit of the Scopus itself. Monday brings up the matter of micro-level features in the target texts, i.e. stylistic and semantic elements may be lost in the target text from the source text, as these don't necessarily have to be translated. It brings up the matter of unnecessary jargon using the example scopus and translatum, and he says that workable terms already exist and these terms do little to further translation theory, so it is questionable as to whether these terms are necessary. In conclusion, the Scopus theory complements Rice's types and varieties diagram, and indeed this diagram is almost necessary in order to use the Scopus theory. The Scopus theory allows translators to concentrate on the end product. They have that freedom necessary in order to make the text understandable in the target audience context. It can be hard to apply to literary texts, although this isn't impossible, and there does seem to be a lack of justification for the additional jargon used in the theory. Thank you very much for listening.